What's up, everyone? Lance here, and I'm back with another solo episode. First thing first, I want to apologize for missing last episode. I'm going to explain that in this episode, why I missed that episode. But before I get into this episode, I want to say that May 20th marks the 3-year anniversary of the See-Through podcast. So I've been doing this 3 years, and with that said, I'm going to be taking a break from this podcast. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that out there now. I'm going to explain why I'm taking a break in this episode. So this episode is going to be a little bittersweet because I'm celebrating 3 years of doing this, but I'm also going to acknowledge why I'm taking a break. But before I explain that, I want to give a huge life update. It's probably the biggest life update in terms of my vision loss journey that I've had since starting this thing 3 years ago, and that is cane training. I have some O&M training scheduled in late May. I have a couple weekly sessions scheduled. I won a grant, which is pretty cool. As you guys know, I'm not legally blind, which is kind of the criteria for most like O&M instructors to teach you. So I had to apply for a grant for those who are not legally blind, and I got it. And so it's all free training here in New York City. The instructor is going to be coming to my house, and I have no clue what to expect. I'm honestly very nervous about it. As we all know, I don't use a cane, and partly the main reason is I have so much central vision left that I don't think I need it right now. Certain times I do, like at nighttime or if it's a particularly really crowded space. But, maybe if I know how to use one, I'll use it. And obviously in the future when my vision has diminished more, because let's be real, my RP isn't going anywhere, I will need to use a cane. So it's better to get ahead of it versus wait for it. So that's why I applied for that grant. And that's why I'm so excited / nervous. I've already checked the box of not driving, which I think is the big step one for most visually impaired people, is they have to quit driving. That's a huge marker on the journey of vision loss, is giving up driving. And then I think the second one is using a cane, because that kind of identifies you as someone who is visually impaired or blind, low vision, legally blind, whatever you want to say. There's a million names of what you can say, but yeah, I'm excited. I need to learn how to use one the correct way. I like breaking rules, but I'm a firm believer of knowing the rules so you can break them. So I want to learn proper technique, learn what's expected of me in that regard. And then, if I want to tweak and alter it, I will. That's just my mentality. So yeah, wish me luck. I'm going to try my best to make some content out of me learning to use a cane, but I can't promise it because obviously I'll be tied up in actually learning. So, but anyways, I'm stoked to get that out there. Yeah. All right. Now on to the podcast, right? I told you at the beginning of this episode, I'm going to be taking a break from this podcast. You're probably wondering, what does that look like? What is that? And I'm going to get to that. But first, I just want to kind of reflect on the past 3 years. When I started this thing, I had nothing, and I built a podcast. This is episode 88. I've gained Instagram followers, YouTube subscribers, TikTok, Twitter, whatever, Facebook. I built something here and it's growing. And that's something I did not have when I started. And I'm very thankful for anyone who listens to this podcast and gives me the time of their day, gives me a reason to kind of get in front of this camera and microphone and kind of express myself and learn to accept, living with retinitis pigmentosa, learning to live with the fact that what I see today, I won't see in the future, which, takes a lot of effort to kind of wrap your mind around. I don't care what anyone says, it does. It takes a lot of effort, or at least it does for me. I'll say that. But yeah, 3 years of growing this thing, I kind of look at my podcast as chapters. Like my podcast has chapters to it. The first chapter was starting this podcast. I started with just audio, just audio episodes. And that was my first 49 episodes were audio only. Remember this intro? Howdy, everyone. This is episode 1 of the See-Through Podcast. The See-Through Podcast is hosted by myself, Lance Johnson, a filmmaker and video editor based in Brooklyn, New York. Fun fact, the guitar in that intro was me playing it, and the rest of it was composed by my friend Josh Lim, who composed the new intro. Which I think is super sick. So shout out to Josh. You're the man. But yeah, chapter 1, starting this podcast. I was a different person. Everyone, happy Friday. This is Lance. Just wanted to say I started a podcast. It's called the See-Through Podcast. The link is in my bio. Episode 1 is up now. Go give it a listen. Thanks. I did not know who I was when it came to vision loss. I did not know what to expect about vision loss. I didn't know anyone in the vision loss community besides my mom and sister. And to think of how far I've come from that to now with, kind of just, I feel like I am just a part of this community now. And I have built such a large network of people in the blind and disabled community as a whole, which is really awesome. But yeah, it's kind of wild for me to think back on, episode 1. Me introducing myself and the podcast and what it's about and learning to interview people. I've had some experience in the past, as a documentary filmmaker, interviewing people for, corporate videos as well. But, interviewing people about vision loss, I interviewed the 2 blind brothers on episode 3. I felt like I just kind of jumped in, and I've just been going ever since. And I've met so many people in the while starting this, in chapter 1. And that was me just kind of figuring out my voice as a podcaster, my branding. Yeah, just getting comfortable behind the microphone, talking about what I'm talking about and kind of figuring out what I want to talk about. What are my interests? What do I actually want to learn? Like, I think at first I was just like this sponge that just wanted to soak up any and all information because I didn't know anything. And now, I feel like now that I know a lot of information through my interviews, I can be more specific on what, I want to learn and talk about. That first chapter got me, in a Foundation Fighting Blindness Beacon Story video.
Foundation Fighting Blindness presents Beacon Story, Lance Johnson.
And, 49 episodes, not too bad. I interviewed my sister and I met a lot of my current friends that are in my network in that first chapter. And then I'd say, moving on, I'd say chapter 2 was when I switched to video, started my YouTube channel. I had my first video guest was Dave Steele, the blind poet. Yeah, that's cool. Kind of learning how to do the video side of things, which honestly, as I'm a video editor, so that was kind of natural to me, but it was kind of weird to edit me talking to someone. Yeah, and that was when I still had my same logo and all that, and old black background. Podcast had a different look. But that was when I had that new music incorporated like I talked about. And I think that's when I really took this podcast to the next level was, chapter 2. I interviewed my mom, which was awesome.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
It's also when I started vlogging, releasing some vlogs that you've seen. Your boy's looking fresh with these slide-ons. Now we're in business. And I also brought my wife on and we interviewed Andy Ogg and his wife, Angela Ogg. So yeah, that's a really pivotal chapter because that's my most successful episode. But yeah, chapter 2 was a big one. It kind of got me, going, a lot of momentum. And now I'm in chapter 3. I got this new logo, switched up the look of my background. Still doing the same thing, essentially interviewing guests, but the new thing in this chapter was solo episodes, and I have merch, all that. So I feel like, it's growing, because going back to my point, when I started, I had nothing, none of this. And now I have a catalog of episodes, I have a network that I've grown and kind of fostered, friendships that I've kind of nourished and, kept around. And, I feel like, I met some strangers on the internet and now I'm friends with strangers and, DMing people, responding to comments, building a following. And I'm proud of it and I'm thankful for whoever listens to this. But yeah, I look at this podcast in terms of chapters because I'm always trying to reinvent this thing and keep it fresh, keep it new and exciting. And I think I'm in the process of figuring out what my chapter 4 is going to be, my next chapter. And I think that's going to be the reason why I'm taking a break. And I'm going to explain that. Obviously, I know I keep saying I'm going to explain it and then I go into something else. But, when I started this podcast, I had 2 goals. The first goal was educate myself on what my life's going to be like as someone experiencing vision loss. Didn't really know much about it. And now I know so much about it. So I can say I checked that off. But that's a little asterisk beside that because obviously this is a continuous experience, learning experience that you kind of have to keep. Like obviously I'm going to keep learning more and more and more and more as time goes on, the more people I talk to. And also as I start getting more firsthand experience on vision loss, like for example, me going through cane training, like that's going to teach me a lot. So my point is like the educational part is checked, but it's obviously a never ending thing. But if I stop the podcast today and I quit everything, I can say that I learned a ton of information about this community and what to expect and kind of look out for and what to do and the technology involved, how to adapt mentally, physically, all that. And then my second goal, to bridge the gap between the non-disabled and disabled worlds, decided in the blind worlds, because there's a huge gap because, I have this perspective because I'm kind of right in the middle and I see how knowledgeable the blind community is on, obviously blindness and what the whole world means in terms of accessibility, the advantages of accessibility, the tools used, canes, screen readers, etc. And then I also see, a lot of my friends who are not blind or disabled, and they're just kind of, I don't want to say uneducated, but they just they have a lack of knowledge because it's just not something that they feel like they need to know. And there's some truth to that. But yeah, there's just a lack of knowledge out there, and that's due to, representation. There's not much blind representation out there except like, the classic stereotypes of the guy in the sunglasses and all that. But I'm not going to get into all that. But so yeah, my goal was to bridge the gap because I think that's the reason why I was so nervous and anxious when I was younger, when I thought about vision loss, because I didn't know anything about it. And because there was no one bridging that gap. And it's a huge thing for me to say, right? Like, oh, I'm going to bridge the gap. And I know it can't just happen with me, but I'm just saying that's my goal, is to bridge those two worlds together, kind of a representative of both communities talking about, both sides of the story and both perspectives. And that's been a goal of mine. I want people who are newly diagnosed, like I was when I was 12, to kind of have, a perspective of what it's like going into this. Most perspectives out there are further along the journey. And obviously there's tons of wisdom that I don't have that those perspectives have. But I think it's nice for me to be in the middle. As we all know, blindness is a spectrum. If I'm in the middle of that spectrum, if someone's newly diagnosed or has a family member, partner, or whatever who's going through this, who's going to go through this, I always thought it'd be nice to have a perspective in the middle of that transitional perspective on what I'm thinking as I transition into someone who is going to be legally blind. But anyways, my 2 goals was to educate myself and to bridge that gap. I can say that I've checked the box on both of those to a certain degree, but like I said, it's an ongoing, never-ending thing. But my main point here and why I'm bringing this up in relation to me taking a break is the second goal, bridging the gap. In order to bridge that gap, I need to reach as many people as possible. And I need to grow my audience as big as possible. to get my perspective out there. With that said, my short form content, my Instagram Reels, my TikToks, my YouTube Shorts just outperforms my podcast episodes by so much. Like on TikTok, my videos have been viewed over 270,000 times. On YouTube, my shorts probably are, I have about 150,000 views on YouTube, and my shorts probably make up 75% of those views. And on Instagram, my account has reached over 160,000 people in the past 3 months. Basically, long story short, my short form content is reaching more people than my podcast is. And I started this as a podcast, and it will always be a podcast, by the way. I guess some people out there are probably like, oh no, Lance is going to stop podcasting. I'm not going to stop podcasting. I like podcasting too much. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'm too much of a talker to just not have one. So the podcast is staying, but I guess what I'm saying is, if my goal is to bridge the gap, I need to think of the best way to do that. And is podcasting the best format to do that? I think it's one great way to do it, and that's why I'm going to keep it around. But in terms of, bi-weekly schedule, I think that's going to eat up a lot of my time as a creator. So I want to free myself up more to make more of this short form content because it has bigger reach. And honestly, it's fun to make as well. I just want to be able to free myself up to experiment with different mediums, and the podcast right now is tying up all my time. And I think I could maybe have a bigger reach, trying to do other things. It's just experimenting, I don't get paid to do this. So everything's an experiment. This is a labor of love for me. A lot of effort and work goes into this, and I'm not tied in anything, but this project means so much to me. It honestly feels like part of my personality now and who I am as a person. But, I'm treating this thing like a business. So, I got to take some risks to grow this thing. And so I'm taking a break to kind of recalibrate and look at things from a different perspective. Try to move from just being a podcaster to being a content creator. The podcast isn't going anywhere. I'm still going to interview guests. I'll have at least one guest on a month. If you're a long-term listener and you listen every week, this will impact you because obviously it's less episodes. And again, I can't promise when I'll be back, but I'm gonna take a little break here because I'm trying to free up my time to do other things. Also free up time for personal life. There's so many Saturdays where this is my day and I'm here editing, and I've been missing out on real life stuff from doing this podcast. It frustrates me. I don't mind working hard because this is something I believe in, but I also have to protect myself from burning myself out. And I wasn't doing that. And I think I'm burnt out, honestly. And I think the reason why I'm burnt out, honestly, isn't the podcast itself or whatever it is. I'm burnt out because my day job, my job that pays me is video editing. So I edit all day for work, and then I edit this podcast in my free time. And to be honest with you, it used to feel separate. And now it's starting to feel just like jumping from one job to the next job. And I just want to make sure that I can keep them separate and I can keep the podcast feeling fresh, keep the passion in the passion project. It's easy to lose that if you're not careful. And I've been really, walking that line very closely. And I think I've ventured over into the, I think I've been blurring the lines. I don't know. I hope this doesn't come off as me whining. It's just me being honest. I preach about transparency. But yeah. And by the way, I know this is kind of a lame 3-year anniversary episode. I wish I had more bells and whistles going on. I wish I could, pull out the fireworks and have this really extravagant 3-year episode where I reflect and I wanted to do that. I thought about doing that. But like I said, I think that's just kind of evidence that I'm burning myself out because I was like, man, I don't know if I have the time to do that or the energy to do that. So the big 3-year celebration is going to have to be postponed. And instead you get an episode of me announcing taking a break. And I'll be real. It pains me. It pains me to take a break because I've been going so hard on this. I love doing this. I love getting to know everyone, who listens and connecting with guests and chatting with people and in the DMs and comments and seeing how people react to things I say and all that. It's really fun. And I've had some people reach out to me, who really appreciate listening, and my podcast has helped them in some ways. And I'm not making this about me. I'm not like, oh, look how cool I am. I'm just saying, like, what I'm doing is working, and that's really fucking cool. Really, really cool. And more importantly, it's working for me too. Because like I said, I've learned so much and grown so much. I went from not even knowing what orientation and mobility training was and getting called out for it on Twitter, by the way, by somebody, to now signed up for orientation and mobility training. That's wild, and that's how this works. All you got to do is get your foot in the door. If you're new to this world, it's okay. It's okay you don't know anything. I didn't know nothing. And now look at me. But, I've done the work, I've learned. And if you're new, you can do the work too. You can learn. But don't be afraid to jump in, I think a lot of people think that this disabled community, blind community, low vision community, visually impaired community, legally blind community, whatever you want to call it, is this exclusive club that you have to be disabled enough to join. And whatever that disabled enough means is subjective. And honestly, I don't even know what that means. It's a weird phrase to say, are you disabled enough? But I think that's where people's brains go. Are you disabled enough to be a part of this community? It's been nice for me to learn that that's not true, and that you can get into this world whenever the fuck you want to, despite what anyone else may try to tell you, or people in your family may think, like, or your friends may think, oh, you're not blind enough, you're not disabled enough, you don't need X, Y, Z. You don't need the community aspect of it yet. And I call bullshit on that, because me doing this, jumping in before I technically needed to, before I'm legally blind, I'm doing all this, doing cane training, starting this podcast, has been a complete game changer for me. I took that boundary, that mental block of, it's not your time to learn yet. You're not blind enough to need to learn all this stuff. And I just basically, bulldozed through it. And now I'm ahead of the game. I'm ahead of the curve. So that's the advantage of this podcast. And that's the message I'm trying to get out there, and hopefully is getting out there. I'm excited. I'm excited for this next chapter. I'm scared too. I've been processing this break for a bit, because honestly, I was like, should I even take a break? Should I take a break? And the more time I took off, the more I realized this is a good thing for me. Who knows what chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, chapter infinity will look like for this podcast. But it's a journey. And, what's cool about this podcast, if I keep it going, which I plan to, is you'll be able to start at episode 0 before I was legally blind, and you'll be able to follow my journey into legal blindness or wherever I go. You'll go from hearing a perspective of not knowing anything to learning and growing into their vision loss. And it's going to be fun for me to document my journey. This podcast is a way for me to do that. I hope it's going to be helpful for me to do this. It's definitely helpful for myself. Sorry for all the rambling in this episode. But yeah, that's the update. I hope it makes sense. Sometimes when I'm in here recording this type of thing, I just kind of freestyle off the top of my head. So some of it does feel like rambling, because it is, honestly, because I am freestyling, what I'm talking about, in these solo episodes. And I just wanted to, get this info out there. And if you have any questions, reach out to me, email me at the seethroughpodcast@gmail.com. Direct message me on whatever social media platform. By the way, if you just stream this podcast on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you may want to follow me on social media if you haven't yet, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss, any of the short form content that I plan to make. That doesn't fit in with the podcast release, because you're not going to get that kind of content on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you stream your podcast. If you really want to keep up with everything I'm doing, follow me on social media, at See Through Pod. And that goes for basically every social media platform. And then also definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. So I have links to all that in the description down there. And in the meantime, while I'm on this break, you can always obviously go back, listen to any episode you haven't checked out yet. I would be very surprised if someone out there has heard every episode. But yeah, I just did 3 different podcasts. I was a guest, on their podcast. By the way, if you didn't know, I have on my website, see-through-pod.com/press, I have made a playlist of every podcast appearance that I've done, as a guest, not the host, to make it easy for you. But yeah, I just did 3 different podcasts. I was on the At Banter podcast, which is a really great podcast. They've been killing it. I was their 332nd episode. So obviously they've been doing this a while. They're true pros, and it was cool to be on their podcast and to chat about, the See-Through podcast and my journey and everything and in between. So go give that a listen, follow them, listen to them. Great podcast. I also just did my first live stream interview, which was a lot of fun, with JoJo over on her YouTube channel. She has a great following there, and she built this really neat intro for my episode that got me pumped up. It really showed my growth here. From when I started to where I am now. And she asked me some really great questions, and she has a great channel there. JoJo is a deaf-blind content creator who touches on a lot of topics on her channel. Those topics cover like sobriety, eating disorders, being disabled, and basically anything and everything, she wants to talk about. So I've been chatting with her for years now over YouTube. She always leaves really thoughtful, great comments on my videos, and it sparked a lot of cool conversations, and it was neat to finally talk to her and go on her podcast. I'll probably have her on here too at one point in the future. So go give that interview a listen. And then lastly, I was on Chad Boughton's, who from Hindsight's 2200, which by the way is now called Unsighted Radio. Chad's been on the See-Through podcast. He has this new podcast that he's doing called The Water Cooler, where he brings people with disabilities on, but the topics that we talk about have nothing to do with disability. It kind of gives, his disabled guests a chance to talk about their hobbies and interests that exist outside of the disability world, which can be kind of hard to do when you're talking specifically about disabilities like I do and Chad does on the podcast. So I think his idea at the water cooler is a really cool idea. And I talked to him about stand-up comedy, music, a lot of different things. So I think that'll be a really unique episode. If you want to learn more about me as a person, go give that a listen. Yeah, and outside of those 3, I have 10 more, I think, on that playlist. So there's a lot of podcast episodes, where I'm the guest that you can go check out. To kind of fill this time that I'm taking a break. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it. I'll say it again. Very thankful for you. If you're listening to this, I do this for myself, but having this as a creative outlet, and then to have the feedback from the listeners and the positive feedback. I get a lot of negative feedback too, but I'm mainly talking about the positive feedback. Means a lot to me as well, because it kind of keeps me going, because this project takes a lot of effort. And sometimes I can't pull it from myself. I got to pull it from my listeners. I got to pull it from other people who I know need this information, need topics, these topics that I discussed covered. Yeah, I appreciate you and what you do for me. So thank you again. I mean it. And like I said, don't be afraid to reach out. I'll respond to every DM that's sent to me. I do want to hear more from people who listen. I would love to pick everyone's brain about, what people get out of my podcast, etc., or think about it. You can leave a review if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave a review of the podcast. I like reading them. And also it helps me look better to those platforms. You can leave a YouTube comment. You can do whatever. I'd love to hear from you. But until next time, which again, I don't know when that is, but it'll be soon. I'm not taking a year break. It'll likely just be a month or two that I'm taking off. I'll be back soon with some great episodes. I actually already have some great guests lined up that I'm excited to interview. So again, the podcast isn't going anywhere. I'm just taking a quick break, and I'll be back for chapter 4. Let's keep this thing growing. Let's keep this thing moving. Hope everyone sticks around. Love everyone. Stay transparent.